Mirror of desired identity. Harry had been sneaking around the castle at night for weeks now, partly because they enjoyed the thrill of potentially getting caught, but mostly because the Gryffindor common room had become unbearable. Hermione had started holding nightly consciousness-raising sessions where she forced everyone to examine their internalized biases, and Ron had kept waking up at 4 a.m. for morning prayers, which would have been fine except he insisted on doing them in the dormitory while loudly chanting in Arabic. "It's called Fajr, Harry," he'd explained when Harry had politely asked if maybe he could pray somewhere else. "It's one of the 5 daily prayers." "Would you ask a Christian not to pray?" "I'd ask anyone not to pray at 4 in the bloody morning," Harry had replied, but Ramad had just given them a look that suggested this was exactly the kind of Islamophobic attitude he'd expected from someone raised by Muggles. So Harry had taken to wandering the corridors after curfew, using their invisibility cloak to avoid Filch and his increasingly unhinged rants about woke students ruining his beautiful detention system with their trauma responses and emotional needs. It was during one of these late-night wanderings that Harry discovered the abandoned classroom on the 3rd floor, and more importantly, the enormous mirror that dominated the far wall. The mirror was obviously ancient, with an ornate gold frame covered in strange inscriptions. Harry approached it cautiously, half expecting it to start lecturing them about their appearance or demanding to know their pronouns like everything else at Hogwarts seemed to do these days. But when Harry looked into the mirror, they froze. The reflection looking back at them wasn't Harry as they were now, confused, tired, and wearing robes that never quite fit right. Instead, the mirror showed Harry as they'd always dreamed of being, confident, successful, and surrounded by well, this was where it got weird. In the reflection, Harry was standing in what appeared to be a massive pride parade, but they were clearly the Grand Marshal. They wore a crown made of tiny rainbow flags and a sash that read the ultimate oppression overcomer. Behind them stood their parents, James and Lily Potter, but they weren't just alive, they were holding signs that read, "We are so proud of our trans child," and "Death to the patriarchy." What the hell? Harry whispered. But the reflection wasn't finished. As Harry watched, more figures appeared behind their parents. There was Hagrid, but instead of his usual shabby appearance, he was wearing a perfectly tailored suit with a badge that read Ally of the Year. Professor McGonagall stood beside him, but she was younger somehow, and holding a sign that said, "I always knew Harry was special." Even more bizarre, there was a figure that looked like Snape, but this version of Snape was smiling and holding a banner that read, "Sorry I was such a dick, love, your favorite professor." "This is mental," Harry muttered, but they couldn't look away. The Mirror Harry raised their hand, and the entire crowd behind them cheered. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Speech!" Speech, and Mirror Harry stepped forward to a podium that had apparently materialized out of nowhere. "My fellow oppressed individuals," Mirror Harry began, their voice carrying despite the fact that Harry's lips weren't moving, "today we celebrate not just my personal journey of self-discovery, but the dismantling of every system of oppression that has ever existed." The crowd went wild. Harry noticed that somehow everyone they'd ever wanted approval from was there, their teachers, their classmates, even the Dursleys were in the back looking absolutely miserable while holding signs that read, "We were wrong and Harry is the best." "Through my courage and authenticity," Mirror Harry continued, "I have single-handedly defeated not just Voldemort, but racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and that thing where people don't put trigger warnings on their casual conversations." Real Harry blinked hard. This is absolutely ridiculous. But they kept watching. Mirror Harry was now wearing what appeared to be a cape made of every pride flag that had ever been created, and the crowd had grown to include what looked like representatives from every marginalized group in history. There was a banner stretched across the back that read Harry Potter, the ultimate intersectional hero. Furthermore, Mirror Harry announced, "I have created a world where everyone's pronouns are automatically known through telepathy, where all bathrooms are gender-neutral, and where every conversation begins with a land acknowledgement." The crowd was going absolutely mental with excitement. Someone started chanting, "Harry! Hurry! Harry!" and soon the entire reflection was filled with people cheering their name. Real Harry felt a strange mix of embarrassment and longing. Part of them wanted to live in that ridiculous fantasy world where they were the ultimate social justice warrior, celebrated by everyone for their incredible wokeness. But another part of them realized how absolutely insane the whole thing was. "Right," Harry said aloud, "I'm definitely spending too much time around Hermione." But they couldn't bring themselves to leave. The mirror was like a drug. Every time they tried to look away, something new and even more absurd would appear in the reflection. Now Mirror Harry was apparently giving awards to people. They handed a trophy to Mirror Dumbledore that read a White Ally of the Year, and another to Mirror Snape that said Most Sensitive Black Professor of the Year. "This is getting out of hand," Harry muttered, but they were transfixed. The scene shifted, and now Mirror Harry was apparently running some kind of school, but it wasn't Hogwarts. This school had classrooms labeled Decolonizing Potions, Feminist Transfiguration, and Inclusive Defense Against the Dark Arts. All the students looked absolutely thrilled to be there, and they were all wearing t-shirts with Mirror Harry's face on them. "Oh, come on," Real Harry said. "That's just narcissistic." But Mirror Harry wasn't done. They were now giving a TED talk to what appeared to be the entire wizarding world. The title on the screen behind them read How I Saved Magic Through Intersectionality. The key, Mirror Harry was saying to the rapt audience, is to understand that all oppression is connected. You cannot fight transphobia without also fighting speciesism against house elves. You cannot challenge racism without also examining the problematic power dynamics inherent in the house system. The audience was taking notes. Furious, detailed notes. Real Harry realized they'd been standing there for over an hour, completely mesmerized by their own ridiculous power fantasy. Right, this is definitely not healthy. But as they turned to leave, they caught one more glimpse of the mirror. This time, the reflection showed something different. Mirror Harry was sitting at a dinner table with their parents, just the three of them. No crowd, no awards, no speeches. Just a family having dinner together. Mirror James was asking about Harry's day at school. Mirror Lily was reminding them to eat their vegetables. It was completely ordinary and completely perfect. Real Harry felt their throat tighten. Fun. They stood there for another few minutes, watching their mirror family eat dinner and talk about nothing important. It was so much more appealing than the circus of social justice activism from before. "Perry?" Harry spun around, heart hammering. Dumbledore stood in the doorway, looking tired and somehow smaller than usual. "Professor? I couldn't sleep, and I found this room, and there was this mirror." Dumbledore walked over slowly, his eyes fixed on the mirror. "Ah, I see you've discovered the mirror of Erist." "Erist?" "Desire spelled backwards. It shows us the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts." Dumbledore's voice was unusually quiet. "Tell me, Harry, what do you see?" Harry hesitated. They could hardly explain the elaborate fantasy about being the ultimate social justice warrior. First I saw myself as some kind of activist, with crowds cheering and my parents being proud of me for being who I am. But then I just saw my family. My parents and me having dinner." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "The mirror shows us what we think we want, and then what we actually want. The former is usually much more complicated than the latter." "What do you see, Professor?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "I see myself," he said finally, "having a normal conversation with a colleague without having to worry about whether every word I say will be interpreted as a microaggression. I see myself making decisions based on what I think is right, rather than what I think won't get me accused of bias." He paused. "And then I see myself as a young man, with my sister alive and my brother not hating me." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "Professor," Harry said eventually, "is it bad that I wanted all that attention and recognition?" "It's human," Dumbledore replied. "We all want to be seen and valued. The danger comes when we lose ourselves in the fantasy of being seen." He turned to face Harry. "You are not your causes, Harry. You are not your identity categories or your struggles or your activism. You are simply Harry, and that is more than enough." Harry felt something loosen in their chest. "Sometimes I feel like I have to be the perfect example of everything I represent." "That's a terrible burden to place on yourself," Dumbledore said gently. And it's not your job to be perfect for other people's comfort. But everyone at school is figuring out their own identity and projecting their own anxieties onto you. That's not your responsibility to manage. Harry looked back at the mirror one more time. The reflection now showed them simply as they were, a kid in pajamas, standing next to an old man in a ridiculous nightgown covered in stars. "It's not very exciting," Harry said. "Reality rarely is," Dumbledore agreed. "But it's real, which is more than can be said for most things these days." As they left the room together, Harry felt lighter somehow. The mirror had shown them their deepest desires, but it had also shown them something else, that maybe, just maybe, they didn't need to be anyone other than exactly who they were. "Professor," Harry said as they reached the corridor, "do you think I'll ever stop feeling like I have to prove myself?" "When you stop caring so much about what other people think," Dumbledore replied, "which, if you're anything like me, should happen sometime around your 70th birthday." Harry laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it felt completely genuine.